I'm Jenny Gross. I work for a pro-life organization in DC called the Susan B. Anthony List. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it. We are an organization that tries to get pro-life women elected to, we started out more in the federal legislature, but now we even have a pro-life women's caucus that assists women trying to get elected into state offices and even local offices in some cases. And we have 5 children.
Those are my youth ministry kids, right back there.
So we have 5 children. We have some pictures we're going to share of them with you. But I'm going to turn it over to Chris. We're going to kind of split this up 50-50. He'd probably take like 75% because he's the theologian after all. So I'll let him tell you a little bit about himself, and I hope you guys enjoy our talk.
Nothing in our marriage is 50-50. Jenny is like 60-40, everything. Probably including this talk. So my name's Chris Gross. I have the privilege of being married to her. She has the misfortune of having to take my last name. We were going to name one of our kids Ooh, kind of like Sue, but didn't decide. Thought it would make it tough, you know. So I teach at the Dominican House of Studies in DC. So the audience that I came from this morning, they all matched in their white habits. And I teach Catholic U and some other places. I get to float around and then take care of our kids as my primary job, playing video games and such. So we're going to talk a little bit tonight about the pro-life movement, since the march is tomorrow. And I think our hope is that we each get to bring a little bit of our expertise to the subject. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, my doctorate is in moral theology ethics. So I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of the Catholic moral tradition and the pro-life piece of that tradition, philosophical and theological, and then Jenny is going to handle all things practical because that's really what she does. So that's kind of the way. If it all works, it'll be seamless, and if not, you still got cheap food and it's cold outside and you're warm. So, so a little bit, Jenny put this first part in with all the nice little stuff. You can skip that one too because I already told you that. So Jenny is under the impression that every single time that we give a talk, we should have pictures of our kids. I am not under the same impression. I left them, and I'm good with that for a little while. But on the top left there, that's Thomas. He's our newest addition. He was born at the end of October. The little girl in the oversized hat there is our Frances, named after current Holy Father. We went out to dinner and didn't have a name for her, and somebody goes, we should name her, one of our other kids goes, we should name her Frances. And I'm like, yes. So the Pope had just been elected and we went to celebrate, and there she got her name. The unicorn lover, that's Cecilia, and patron saint of music. Of course, she has a recorder. The fashionista there to your right, that is also an aspiring ninja with her bow and arrow. That is Sally. She's our oldest girl. And then our oldest, who we're trying to keep out of jail and gangs. That's Patrick. So all of this actually does really have a point. Jenny and I early on in our marriage found out that we were going to have some difficulty getting pregnant. So we did not know about, much less understand, the church's teachings and help for infertility. So teachings on infertility and help with infertility. We were completely clueless. So We knew nothing about the church's prohibition where in vitro fertilization was concerned, or artificial insemination, a whole bunch of other things. We knew nothing about the Jones Institute. I don't know if you guys know what the Jones Institute is, but we moved from Virginia Beach. That's where Jenny is from. The Jones Institute was actually the first place in 1978 that produced a IVF baby. So the first place, a test tube baby. And the Jones Institute's one of the leading fertility clinics in the world. So we didn't know any of that stuff. We just knew that we were going to have a difficult time getting pregnant. So we went to the Jones Institute for help, and at that point, things started, God, because he is, always there. We went, and then he started to kind of walk us through what the church was actually teaches. So we went to the Jones Institute. They were going to put us on Clomid, which is a low-dose fertility med, which the church says is fine. And then we were going to go to a high-dose fertility med, which is still fine, but I would have some reservations about that. And then the doctor was going to suggest IVF. And all Jenny knew is that she really, really, really wanted a baby. And so then at that point, I had started the doctoral program at CUA, and we started having conversations about what I was learning that the church teaches regarding IVF and new reproductive technologies and what they actually do. And slowly but surely, we came to understand why the church teaches what it does, what she does, and the wisdom in that teaching. But it was at that point, kind of around the same time, that we didn't know that we were going to be able to get pregnant. It was around the same time we had somebody close to us who actually had an abortion, and then soon thereafter, we found out that we were pregnant with Patrick on my birthday, which is May the 30th. I'll give you my address. Feel free to send gifts. And in the next 7 weeks was sheer hell, because we found out so early in the pregnancy that every time Jenny went in, she went in every single week. We were still with the Jones Institute. This was kind of an unfolding process for us. We had only done the low-dose fertility meds. Every time we went to them, they did more hormone tests, and they go, oh, this is a viable pregnancy. Jenny comes home elated, yay. And then the next week, no, your numbers aren't where they're supposed to be. This pregnancy is not viable, and Jenny's in tears. And we rode that roller coaster for 7 weeks. Finally, we went in when we were supposed to be able to hear a heartbeat, and there was no heartbeat. There was just, on the monitor, you could just see, basically the fetal sac and nothing else. So at that point, we had a Dominican friend of ours over. The doctor had already said to her that day, look, I strongly encourage you to go get a DNC. Jenny was like, I'm not going to do that. I'm Catholic. My body will take care of it. We had a Dominican friend come over to our house. He very bluntly said, I still think you're pregnant. I hope you don't mind. I'm not a doctor, but I think you're pregnant. I'm going to go pray for you. So he went back. He prayed at the chapel at the Dominican house to the Blessed Mother all night long. A week later, Jenny's feeling incredibly sick, and so she's like, oh my goodness, this must be the miscarriage. So you go back to the same doctor, same nurse who did the first ultrasound, who encouraged her to get a DNC, and there on the ultrasound is a little heartbeat. And there's Patrick, and my wife, because she never, ever, ever goes without saying, I told you so, was basically like, do you see what I see? You almost made me kill my baby. And the doctor's like, oh my goodness. But the first time around, we said to him, I said, are you 100% sure this is not a viable pregnancy? And he said, yes, I am 100% sure this is not a viable pregnancy. And that's because he's part of the fertility industry. What they do is they create life and then they destroy life. And so they're kind of like pseudo-gods here. And so essentially from those two things happening, our experience with little gangster there and the person in our lives who had an abortion, when we actually came to DC and I started the program at full-time at Catholic University, then we decided that we were going to become active in the pro-life movement in like a profound way. And so Jenny eventually went to work for the Susan B. Anthony list, and we'd worked for another organization together before, and that's been the course of our journey. And so for us, being pro-life is at the heart of our Catholic faith. We don't, it's unintelligible for us to hear people say that they're pro-choice and Catholic. Those two things don't make any sense going together because the two worldviews are completely contrary to one another. Can you go to the next one? So I'm sure that some of this will be review for you, but hopefully some of it will be new as well, right? So for Catholics, we believe in the dignity of every human person from conception to natural death. The English language, if you study other languages, it's not a great language. It's not very rich, right? And so when we use words, for example, like pro-life, because of the rhetorical wars that have gone back and forth between pro-choice people and pro-life people, what you end up associating with the pro-life movement is people who are opposed to abortion. And that's certainly true, right? But the church's point about conception to natural death is really, really important. So we're opposed to in vitro fertilization, which involves the destruction of embryos. We're opposed to embryonic stem cell research if it involves the destruction of embryos. We're opposed to abortion. So all of those are kind of beginning of life issues. Then there's a real push in the pro-life community now, including a local clinic here, the Tepeyac Center, to really take care of mothers who have chosen life, low-income mothers, to actually provide them with care. And Catholic Charities does a lot providing mothers with resources, diapers, and clothing for newborns and that sort of thing. So through life, including right after birth and dealing with the poverty of the world, and then in death, right? So this is the new part that we're facing with assisted suicide and euthanasia. So when we really talk about being pro-life, we're talking about human flourishing from the very beginning at conception all the way through until death. And whatever flourishing looks like at that point, at that stage in human development. Not just opposed to abortion, although clearly that's what gets the most attention. So I think a lot of people, we have a burning desire. I don't, but a lot of people have a burning desire to get along with others. Jenny and I found each other and then we just gave up on the rest of it. So it's really important that you understand, I think, one of the things that's happened, unfortunately, with some folks in the pro-life movement is the other side gets demonized in a way that's not really helpful for the movement, right? So the rhetoric isn't really helpful. From the church's perspective, everybody always chooses the good. Everybody seeks the good. Your free will is made up of intellect and will. Your will in its choosing has an orientation toward the good, all right? I know that's a little complicated, but that means that whenever I go out and I do something, even if I go out and I abuse drugs, for example, I do it because I really feel like that's what's going to be good for me. I never wake up in the morning and go, man, what I really want is to give myself a really crappy day, right? I'm always doing things that I think are going to be good for me as a human person, whether those are physical things I'm doing, like exercise, or those are goods for the soul, like acquiring knowledge or seeking friendship or something like that. I'm always doing it under the aspect of the good. So I get why people support these things, right? IVF helps infertile couples have babies. I get it. Embryonic stem cell research supposedly holds out the cure for Parkinson's and a whole bunch of other diseases that cause people tremendous amounts of suffering. Assisted suicide, people really are suffering and people don't want to see them suffer anymore. So, I get it. Those are all goods that we are seeking in the people who approve of these things. They're all things that they desire. In the church, we call that an end, right? So an end is why you do something, that for the sake of which, right? So if I go and I punch Kristen Judah in the face, I I do that for a reason. I don't just haphazardly, unless it's completely accidental, I don't just haphazardly punch her in the face, unless I didn't know she was standing there and I'm like, oh my goodness, and then I hit her in the face, right? If it's an action that I'm really thinking about, then I'm doing that for a reason. So I'm doing that maybe because she invited me to give a talk and then decided that she was going to have somebody else do it, and I'm really angry and I want revenge. Whatever is the case, I'm doing that for a reason. So the church calls that the end. Then there are all sorts of circumstances that are involved, right? The kind of who, what, when, where questions, and those are important. But then there's an object, and that's what we actually choose to do in our actions. So the young lady who goes to the abortion clinic and has an abortion so that she can go finish college, or the married couple who engages in IVF in order to have a child. The in order to have a child or in order to finish college, those are ends. But then there's an object, a moral object, something that they're actually choosing. And you're like, I am really lost right now. If you picture some sort of beautiful fountain, I always think of lion heads. I don't understand why. But if you picture a fountain with lion heads spewing water, each one of these fonts is a lion head, and all three of them have to be good for an action to be good. That's how the church evaluates moral actions, all right? So for those of you who are steeped in philosophy, this is very different than consequentialism, where we just try to weigh what good is going to be done and what bad is going to be done, and then we choose more good, right? It's not that, all right? This is really taking into consideration what you're seeking, the means by which you're seeking it, and the circumstances involved. And the church says if one of those pieces is broken, if one of them is immoral, then the entire act is immoral, right? So if you walk up to a fountain and two of the lines are spewing water and the other one is not, you're like, oh my goodness, this is a broken fountain. It would be much prettier if every line was spewing water, but instead there's that one broken line there not spewing water. It's the same thing with moral action. So we can choose a moral object that's bad, abortion with a good end to finish college, or we can choose something that's good. I can help an old lady across the street for a bad end in order to mug her, right? Their actions can be broken in a number of ways. And why, right? Why would the church care about all of those things? Well, here's why. Because our actions have the ability to deform and transform us. This goes all the way back to Aristotle, right? What you do impacts who you are. So if you lie, you become a liar. And it's very, very difficult for you to tell the truth, right? If you engage in a whole bunch of sexually illicit activity, then you become someone who is an adulterer or someone who struggles with lust. We build up virtues, good things, and we build up vices, bad things in ourselves. If we're choosing to kill people in order to seek our end, then we are deforming ourselves. And I think that that's what you're beginning to see with the women who have started the Silent No More movement, and we're talking about post-abortion stress syndrome, almost like PTSD. Like, that's what you're seeing, that these decisions to take life impact us deeply. But so clearly they impact us. They impact whoever it is that we are killing, right? And the other thing that they do is they take us away from our final end. All ends are oriented towards some ultimate end. The church argues, Aquinas argues very succinctly, that that's God. Right? And so there are some things that you can never do and be oriented toward your final end. And so the church says for all of these reasons, there are some actions that are intrinsically evil. In and of themselves, they can never ever be chosen. It doesn't matter if you're in the 3rd century or the 5th century or the 7th century or the 21st century. There are some things that you can never do and be a good person. These are things that good people don't do, because they deform you, they're contrary to the natural law, they harm others, and they take you away from your final end. And the things that I just mentioned all involve the destruction of innocent human life. And so the church says, we don't destroy innocent human life, both because of what it is, created in the image and likeness of God, and who we are, creatures also created in the image and likeness of God. Okay, so this is the last part. How am I doing on time? Okay, this is the last part, and then I'm gonna let Jenny take over. And you're right, I took way more time than I was going to. So there's a kind of new fight that's part of the pro-abortion movement, pro-death movement, and that I think the pro-life movement is just now kind of moving into. We know what it is, but what can it do? So I think the science has developed to the extent that we're no longer really questioning whether or not something is a human being. From just a philosophical standpoint, right, it's clearly a human being. It has human DNA and it has being, it has existence. It is in existence, and you know that because you can point to it and go, see, it's in existence. The question is really, what is it? What does that get you? And so we used to think that that got you the right to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, these other things, right? But it doesn't get you that anymore. And so really the conversation that we're having now is the distinction between being a human being and being a human person. Because a human person supposedly is someone who has all of these rights, and a human being doesn't. The church doesn't make that distinction, right? Human beings are human persons for the church. The reason that the people who support these activities want to make that distinction is so that they can strip those rights away from particular groups, from groups at the beginning of life, embryos, from groups at the end of life, people like Terry Schiavo in a PBS state. They want to strip those so that they can kill them. And so what we're really dealing with is a difference between the church, which offers a relational anthropology. So I have value and worth because I am whatever state of being I'm in. I am related to God in a vertical manner, and I'm related to others on a horizontal level. So love of God and love of neighbor. That's who I am. I'm a relational being because we're created in the image and likeness of a Trinitarian God. The other folks have a functional anthropology. You are entitled to rights if you can do certain things. Right? So Terry Schiavo couldn't do certain things. People in a persistent vegetative state can't do certain things. Brittany Maynard, she was going to lose the ability to do certain things. Therefore, it's okay if she takes her own life. We can kill embryos because they can't do anything. We can kill infants in the womb right before they come out because they can't do anything. So you have value and worth because of the things that you're able to do, because we have a set of criteria that we've created as this is what human beings should be able to do, and if you can't do those things, then you no longer are entitled to live. So I think that that's really the next phase that we're going into. We're really already here, but that's really the next fight that we're going to continue to have. We're not just talking about all human beings having dignity, but we're talking about an artificial distinction between being human and being a human person. And that is why
so that for me is where the two pieces intersect. So someone once told me that real life, how do they say it? Real life cuts through religion, Jenny. Real life cuts through religion. You can't just expect that you have this Catholic ideal of how things should go, and that you should expect that out of life and out of politicians and people that are friends of yours or whatever, because when it comes to like where the rubber meets the road, sometimes decisions like these just have to be made. Sometimes abortions have to happen. Sometimes Planned Parenthood has to sell baby parts. Sometimes IVF has to happen, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, because those are real life problems and the church is just not able to deal with those things, supposedly. So when I think about, you know, pro-life and what we're doing at Susan B. Anthony List and what a bunch of other pro-life organizations are doing and why you're gonna march tomorrow, what I think is the practical application of our Catholic faith embodied in how we walk around every single day. And so I just wanted to share with you a couple of things. You can go forward. Back in 2010, I don't know if you remember, but there was a big shake-up in Congress because the Affordable Health Care Act passed with the help of some pro-life Democrats. So there was a whole thing that happened, and our organization, Susan B. Anthony List, went after a lot of those folks, and we got them out of office. We really made people's votes count. We made your voices heard. We held them accountable for what they did. So fast forward then to 2014. This is, I really think this is remarkable. And I think this is how, in the pro-life movement, we have to begin to operate in a very tactical manner. And that is, in 2014, we had this huge canvassing operation. It was the biggest canvassing operation ever put on by a pro-life organization, probably even a conservative organization. I mean, we had a ton of people out there going door to door for various candidates in North Carolina, Louisiana, and Arkansas, trying to unseat the 3 senators there. Kay Hagan, I'm sure you know of her, in North Carolina, Mary Landrieu, and Mark Pryor in Arkansas. Anyways, so we had all these people out there, and we got all 3 of them unseated. We managed to elect in pro-life candidates in place of these staunchly pro-abortion Democrats. And the remarkable thing by doing that is where we were able to marry politics, campaigns, and policy at the legislative level. Because this year, in 2015, we got our pain capable, our 5-month, 20-week pain capable bill. And basically, it's founded on the idea that we know for sure that at 20 weeks, an infant can feel pain in the womb. We know that because when an instrument is inserted and goes toward the infant recoils, just like my 3-month-old at home would. If I touched the bottom of his foot, he would be startled. That's exactly what happens at 20 weeks in the womb. And so there's absolutely no reason that we should have this policy in the United States. We're in the company of people like North Korea, Iran, China. I mean, every other civilized country has a limit on abortions at 20 weeks or less. So we were able to put this bill up, and the people who were fighting for us on the floor were those same 3 senators. We would have never gotten it on the Senate floor had it not been for especially those 3 senators. Now, there were others too, but I mean, really, it's very important to understand the relationship between you going and marching tomorrow, you going and voting in November, and what will happen next year in the legislative year once we get, hopefully, and you can go forward now. Once we get pro-life people in Congress. This year, last year, we were able to get in 19 pro-life women in the House. And get this, 3 in the Senate. Before that, there were 0. 0 pro-life women in the Senate. Okay, let's go forward one more time. So, if we were able to get a pro-life president and a pro-life Congress with a 60-vote majority in the Senate, we would be able to end late-term abortions. We would be able to defund Planned Parenthood. We would be able to make the Hyde Amendment permanent, not like what Hillary Clinton and her folks want to do. And we would get the end of taxpayer funding of abortion, and we would be able to repeal all of the pro-abortion executive orders that Obama has put forward. Also, at the state level, this is a perfect example of what it would look like if we had the right pieces in place at the federal level. There are a ton of awesome things going on at the state level. If you don't know about it, you should really check it out. And the states I would highlight are Texas, West Virginia, Mississippi. There's some great stuff going on because people are, like, they're paying attention. They're on the ground. They're working hard, and they're working at the state level. So things like, I mean, you just can't believe this. If you don't know this, I mean, it's just going to blow your mind. That doctors, that abortionists, I hesitate to call them doctors, but abortionists would have admitting privileges. That is not currently a requirement, that a doctor have admitting privileges to their local hospital. And guess what's happening in the states where these restrictions are being put in place? It is drastically reducing the number of abortions and the number of abortion clinics. Because guess what? Hospitals don't want to give admitting privileges to abortionists. They really don't. So in Texas, now there's some other regulations that are going on in Texas too, but in Texas, for example, where some of these state regulations have been put into place, they've gone from 40 clinics down to 20, and it's expected that before the Supreme Court even votes on it, or decides on it, next year in 2000, or later this year in 2016, that there will only be 6 remaining abortion clinics in Texas. And you know how big the state of Texas is. I mean, 6 is like, we're really getting down to almost nothing. So some other things are higher standards for the clinic. They're being held to more hospital standards. And then some 20-week abortion bans are going around. I mean, it's really been quite remarkable what we've been able to accomplish at the state level. And go forward one more time. I think that's okay. The last thing I'll point out about this election that's coming up this November is that this next president is probably going to get to appoint 3 Supreme Court justices. And that is super important. It's really, really important that we make sure that our Supreme Court justices, it turns out these days, they're basically deciding everything. And so we've got to have pro-life people, Catholics even, real Catholics who adhere to Catholic values in those Supreme Court positions. So I really encourage you to get involved in any way that you can in your state level elections, in the federal elections. Make sure you know your stuff when you're out there talking to your peers. Encourage them to go vote and to vote pro-life and explain to them why. And if you don't know why, do more research to figure out why. If you have questions, we've put our email addresses at the end. We're happy to answer questions anytime. You can email me anytime. You can email Chris anytime. We love talking to people, especially to get some grown-up time. Also, we have some great things going on at SBA List. I brought a sign-up sheet for your email addresses and name if you'd like to put that down. We would love to have you canvass for us if we get closer to the fall. It's a paid position, so it's a way to make a little extra money. But we really, we need you all, your age group especially, to help us out in this fight. We need you to get serious. So whatever Chris and I can do to facilitate that, we are here for you. And definitely pray, vote, and march. So that's it. Okay, so we have 5 minutes for questions. Does anybody have questions?
I just had a quick question about, you're saying that some things you can never do because they harm others, they're contrary to moral law, and they take away from the ultimate end. And there's one other thing, are those all considered mortal sins, and is that what you're referring to, as things we can never do?
So, the things that you can never do are called intrinsically evil acts that are in and of themselves evil. And no, they're not exactly mortal sins, because technically for a sin to be mortal, it has to concern grave matter, full knowledge, and full consent of the will. So
would that be the object in this case?
So those are the objects, right? So when the church is talking about intrinsically evil acts, they're talking about objects. Your action can still be, the object that you choose can still be good, but you can have an evil end. My desire to steal from the old lady by helping her across the street, right? But we can't talk about evil ends that are always and everywhere evil, because of the way moral action works. So you can talk about objects, and then for the sake of whatever the end that the person is seeking, we talk about vices usually.
Okay, and then the related to God, that's the vertical, right? And then the human is horizontal?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Among those 3 things, objects and circumstances, what are circumstances?
Sure. So if you think about being a journalist, right? There are those journalistic questions of the who, what, when, and where. So it really matters. So for example, it's fine for a married couple to engage in things that married couples do, but the where they do that, like if they do that into a church, that is not a good thing, right? So the where in that particular action is really important. But it doesn't concern the object, and it doesn't concern the end. Most of the time when the church talks about evaluating moral actions, their circumstances really deal with culpability for the confessor. So, were you under duress? So those sorts of things that would be dealt with in the confessional, that's last out of those 3.
Sorry.
Oh no, you're good.
Last question. You were saying how the organization that you work for puts pro-life women into political office, which is fantastic, because I'm all about representation of women and
Me too.
being pro-life. I was wondering, you used Texas as an example as where there are a lot of great pro-life advances being made as far as abortion clinics shutting down and legislation being passed. But Texas is also, as far as pro-life is concerned, it's a very pro-execution state. So I was wondering if the policies that these women also support, if it's pro-life in like the very Catholic sense of, you know, euthanasia is wrong, all of those things, like where does the death
But you know, as Catholics,
Here
that
You've gotten her started now.
well, look, I would just caution this. Now, euthanasia, yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that that's a question that's asked of the candidates that we're putting up. We're more concerned at this point about beginning of life issues. However, we have started to transition into like issues of assisted suicide. But likely people who believe in pro-life in as far as anti-abortion are also going to be against assisted suicide. So let's also assume that they're against euthanasia, because I think that's generally the assumption, because they're similar, right? Assisted suicide and euthanasia. But the death penalty, that's a whole different question. And even as Catholics, that's a whole different question for us. That is not something that we're required as Catholics to be against, is the death penalty. And so while you may choose to be against the death penalty as a Catholic, certainly, there are other Catholics who don't feel that way, and they're not under any obligation to feel differently. It is not the same, because it is not the taking of an innocent human life. Now, there have been lots of things said, and we could get into that, and that's fine. But what I'm getting at is, at its core, the idea of the death penalty is not against Catholic teaching, except that in the broken world that we live in, it is not advisable.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'll add something. The Catechism says that the use, the Catechism cites Evangelium Vitae, which was John Paul II's document on the Gospel of Life, an encyclical that he wrote in 1993. And in that, which is also in the Catechism, it says that the use for the recourse to the death penalty is rare if practically non-existent, right? So that's the language of the Catechism. So that's very different than calling something an intrinsically evil act. So since John Paul II, the Church, including the USCCB and now including Francis, has been anti-death penalty. But they're anti-death penalty in a different way, because the Church has never changed its teaching on calling the death penalty intrinsically evil. Instead, the argument, depending on who you read, is that we live in a world where human dignity is under such assault that we can't distinguish the innocent from the guilty, and so the Church makes a commitment to protect all life. But as Jenny said, murder for the Church is defined as the taking of innocent human life. So Aquinas was pro-death penalty. Right? So you have that history in the Church of people who were supportive of use of the death penalty as a recourse to justice.
All right.
We'll stay, but are we done?
Yeah.
Are we done? We're done, but we'll stay if you want to chat. All right, thanks guys.